because when I sat down to write it, the original book that it's based on, the one I wrote as a kid, basically, was one book. I'm not sure exactly how long, because I never did have it in standard format, per se.
I'm not hearing that.
And this is probably, this story here is a fourth or a third of the way through.
You're overarching.
Yeah, of the overall story, as much as it's following it, which isn't really doing that much anymore. So,
well, how much do you diagram out in advance before you write? Are you someone who does, the butcher paper with all of the events?
I might have an idea in my head of where I want to go with it. Probably the closest I came to that was in the second book. Mm-hmm. Because when I started it, I jumped ahead from the ending of this, went into a certain point, probably in the first 4, 5, 6 chapters, with a lot of backstory to catch up. Then I decided to move the last 2 chapters from this into the second book. Write a new first chapter for it. And go from there. And so those original first 4 or 5 chapters got moved basically to the end of the second book. So I had the stuff there.
So it really changed.
So I was kind of filling in the gap between the two then. So I was writing to a specific point, but what happened along that route wasn't necessarily planned. I'd get to a certain point and say, well, let's be like going for a Sunday drive, you're driving down the road, say, oh, heck with it, let's go. Let's take it.
Might be more interesting over there.
Let's drive down this way, or let's go around the lake the other way or something,
I think that's hard for just kind of people who aren't writers, and even agents and editors, to understand sometimes, is that the author has less control than people think. You can't, you're not exactly the god in this universe, even though you created it from scratch, right? And I think that if the average reader knew how often writers wake up in the middle of the night saying, "Please, protagonist, go away," or when a secondary character thinks that he's the protagonist of the book. I had to write 100 pages just to get rid of a secondary character once because he thought the book was about him. I'm knocking on my brain pan in the middle of the night. But if you really pull together characters and a story in a rich and full way, that's what you want to have happen, right? You want it to take on a life of its own.
It's sometimes that I like to say that I'm not really writing. I'm the first one reading the story. Mm-hmm. That somehow I've got insight into what's going on, and I don't know what's going on until I read it and I get it down on paper.
Have you had the experience where you're typing along, you're going along, and you didn't know something was going to happen until you actually see it on the screen?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I love that. And it's completely, speaking of fantasy, I think to non-writers that seems incredible because it must have been going on in your brain and it must have gone out your fingers. It didn't just kind of drop from the sky, but from the writer's point of view, it often does.
But a lot of times what happens in the story is based on what I've already written. Mm-hmm. And especially with conversations I've come into a conversation where it's designed to do a certain thing, to set up a certain premise or something, and it goes completely the opposite.
I love that.
So I either take it and run with it, or I have to figure out a way to bend it back to get it back to where I want it.